This is it.
This is it.
This is
Okay.
it.
Welcome to episode 1.
Yeah. Chapter Athletic.
For our first segment on our podcast, we're going to be looking at this month in running. So what's going on this month, and we are starting in February, but there was something pretty cool that happened last month, and that is the Strava Chipotle Challenge. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't. Have you?
We saw it a little bit.
The premise of it is that Strava and Chipotle teamed up, created a partnership, and most of us are familiar with the kind of title of local legend, essentially, which is where on Strava you have a segment and the person who holds the most segments or the most attempts over that segment becomes the local legend.
Is that when you like warm up and then you just do laps of the same thing? Just try
you could do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you probably have some.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I've dabbled.
So if you go on your Strava, you can find out if you have any, but you will get a little badge essentially. And it does get very competitive in the running community. And Strava has set up this challenge where they kind of put little segments outside Chipotle stores in, I think there was about 24 cities across the US. What was new this year was that they wanted to actually introduce who could collectively complete the highest mileage, so as a city. And actually it progressed so that they had a heat map, which was this Chipotle Strava City Challenge heat map. It was a first of its kind leaderboard, which showcased like daily updates within each city and how they're doing and who's leading each city. So I think people got really into it across the US and all eyes were on it.
So what's the end goal? I missed like what the actual prize is. Like,
because
there's got to be a reason.
So if you come out on top, each city you get free bowls for a year of chocolate.
Okay. Yep.
It is salad, I think, pretty sure those bowls, which I am pretty disappointed at.
No,
It's some burritos too.
it's a burrito. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like legit.
Sort of
It's like
Mexican,
Guzman, but like I don't know if it's better. It's at least on par with Guzman.
I
We
don't
don't
think
get
I've
into a
even had
Guzman
chicken.
versus sombrero debate just now.
Oh no, Guzman hands down.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Sombrero
I
is
have,
like.
I have words, but we'll leave
Okay.
that for now.
The person who wins in each city does get free bowls for a year. So it gets super competitive, but I think obviously it became way more than the free bowls for the year. It was just bragging rights, really. And unfortunately, what happened this year was that obviously the LA wildfires were absolutely devastating. And as a result, LA, they had to cancel the challenge in LA, which was of course the right thing for them to do for both sides, for everyone's health and safety. But LA was actually my favourite city from last year, from the previous year, because what happened was there was actually 5 people that were pretty competitive in 2023. And the current leader reached out on Strava DMs to his fellow competitors and pitched a bit of an idea. So he found a bit of a loophole in the T's and C's.
Snuck into the
Everybody loves a
DMs.
loophole.
Snuck into the DMs.
So he found in the terms and conditions that if in the event that people draw, everyone wins.
Yeah.
So he reached out to
That's risky. Because you could say, let's draw, and then you could take it all for yourself. So there's a lot of trust involved.
There is, but he reached out to all of his 5 serious competitors, and they all each hatched a plan to end on, I think it was about 369 segments.
That's a lot.
Well, that's 369 of 600 meters. Fair amount.
That's crazy.
And they all collectively won in the end. So it was a beautiful story that came out of the previous year. But I do recommend to go have a look at what went on this year. It was an absolute fierce battle. I don't know if you have any add-ons from what you saw.
Yeah, best thing I saw was in the Arizona battle, there was a couple of the ultra runners and they set a record for the segment that they were working on. So they just went back and forth. I think one of the guys, ran for like 41 hours straight. It was just neck and neck till the end because they weren't uploading their like GPS data until they'd stopped. Neither of them knew who was in front, just right until the end. So yeah, those guys just duked it out. One guy got in over the top in the end and it was just chaos.
So was it the most segments? It's not how fast you did it, but the most amount
the
of
most.
segments?
The most volume.
Yeah,
They did
wow.
almost 2,000 of that 330 metre segment.
Which is ridiculous.
I mean, at least you can get all the calories back after eating Chipotle forever. I think.
Yeah, do have a look into it because it was a really fun little challenge. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about this month in running.
Next on the agenda, we've got welcoming Gear Gab. So
Gear Gab.
This is our segment where we have a look at the recent technology, recent shoes and gear that we all like to spend our money on. And just
what?
Talk,
I only have like one pair of shoes. Like I just run in the same pair.
Sure.
Of course. So for Gear Gab this week, we've got Adidas Adizero drops the Adidas Evo SL. And the Adidas Pro 4. So,
do you have either of them?
No, I don't yet, but I have been. You guys have been hammering me about the SLs.
Don't give anything away.
So, what they've done with this shoe, they've got a big slab of the Lightstrike Pro, the old compound that was in the Adios Pro 3. They've got the rocker that sort of resembles the Evo, hence the name, where they've positioned the rocker at about 60% through the length of the shoe. So no plate or energy rods in this one. They've tried to design it so it's like a tempo shoe, a daily trainer, sort of versatile, but not really a racing spec shoe. So the upper is like a comfort upper. You can see that it is quite flexible, quite soft to have on. And
still more heavy. It lasts. Like it's not super light or like it's light, but it's not thin and flimsy by any means.
100%. So I think they've knocked this one out of the park. They've been competing with shoes like the Saucony Endorphin Speed 3. They've been competing with the Asics Nova Blast.
This thing as well.
Yeah. I think it'll rob a few Super Blast sales, to be fair, especially considering it's almost $100 cheaper and you are getting like a full slab of proper super foam. I think Adidas has really changed the game with that one a little bit in the sense that it's going to offer a lot more performance for shoes at a similar price.
And so for the reason, obviously you say it's not a race day shoe, and that's purely because there's no plate or rods, or so it's relying on that foam, which makes it more of that everyday kind of trainer for your training, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So I think once you sort of take this shoe to like interval paces or race paces, you do notice that it doesn't have quite the stiffness of a comparable racer that has some stiffening aging in it. The lockdown is not super tight with this upper, just because it is not built to strap your foot in for a really intense run.
And it doesn't look like a super aggressive rocker or anything, or?
Yeah, I think because it's not super aggressive. I think because it does flex through relatively nicely. I think
it's not as stiff as the Super Blast, like that I can feel.
Sure.
The big thing for me as a bigger runner, I guess, and someone who's had forefoot issues before, I'd say the earlier rocker, or would you say earlier or later? I guess it's earlier rocker.
Yeah, for sure.
It just feels so smooth for me. Like I feel like it doesn't put any pressure on my toes, and as far as how natural shoes feel, whatever they've done with this particular geometry, it's magical. Like it really is a big difference from like even Super Blast. Like I'd say they're really comfortable shoes, but the SLs are a whole different ball game.
I totally agree. I think that it does really, really well as a daily trainer, and then you can pick it up a little bit to tempo and it still feels amazing. So I think even for me personally, the versatility in that shoe is superior compared to a Super Blast, where if I'm running slow in a Super Blast, I feel like I do just sink into that shoe a bit too much. And I think that the firmness of that Lightstrike Pro is a real asset to Adidas.
Yeah, Adidas are coming out with some bangers.
They are bangers. And speaking of repeated bangers,
speaking of the bangers,
nice transition.
we have the even bigger banger of the long-awaited Adios Pro 4. So essentially, Adidas have basically revamped the Adios Pro 3 in virtually every way. They've got a new upper. The upper is looking on all the reviews so far to be sort of more comfortable, a bit less plastic, and a bit softer.
I'd say it's one of the best looking super shoes that's been released.
Yeah.
It is
So
just
aesthetic.
so clean.
It is so
I say across the
ridiculously
board, Adidas, like my Evo SLs are the black and pink colour. Oh man.
I think the designs across every brand really have needed to really step up.
Look, I don't want to be derogatory to any brand. I'd say Hoka is like iffy for me. Like there's some pretty crazy colorways in there. I'm more of a neutral kind of guy, being from a fashion background. So yeah, and mint, I mean, let's talk about the Super Blast. Mint colour. I'm not a huge fan. That might be controversial.
Going to something that's more aesthetic, back to the Adios Pro 4.
So that is aesthetic. So there's no qualms there.
Which actually has a new compound of Lightstrike Pro, which is notably different to the old one, the one that's currently running in that Evo SL. So it's a bit softer than the last one. The last Adidas Pro 3 was a firmer ride, and it suited a lot of people for that. But this has just got that extra bounce, extra bit of pop. I think with the repositioned rock up, that again, similar to the SL, is a bit further back. When you do hit this shoe, the sweet spot on it is quite large. Like, you're not sort of forced to hit a really, small surface area of the shoe to get the most out of it. You can hit it pretty hard. So I think, not knocking the Adidas Pro 3, I love that shoe so much, but I feel like they've done a good job in improving this Pro 4 in virtually every way. The midsole is better, is nicer, the upper is nicer, the ride is nice, and it's just so aesthetic.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does the light lock mean that you can see on there?
They've tried to redo the upper, I think related to the lacing. So
Yeah, a lot of people have bad feedback on the lacing in general for these lines. Even the Evo, a lot of people criticise it. So I guess they're trying to find that kind of happy medium.
the Adidas Pro 3 did eat my Achilles a little bit in terms of
really?
the string. So I haven't run this for long enough to see if it's going to do that. But
Because do they have the padding at the back? Because that's what...
Yeah, it feels
Not
pretty good.
super.
I mean, Darcy and I, full disclosure, we're the same foot size. So when Darcy bought these shoes, we actually did a little session where we tried out both the Evo SLs, Adidas Pro 4s. I had the Cloud Boom Strikes as well, because I thought I had run in them and I thought they were quite a impressive, reactive feeling shoe. And the difference for me, putting those on, it was like a completely different game completely. Like the energy return you get from them, it's just like you can turn your feet over super quick. I really think it's going to be hard to beat them.
I think it will be too.
Yeah.
I've also been seeing sort of rumours of that Asics Hyper shoe, the MZ Type
Yes,
1. So
that looks
seen
very
that
interesting.
on Instagram and on enough elite athletes' feet enough times to think, are Asics going to pull the pin on bringing that shoe into production? So it essentially looks like a Metaspeed Sky, like a beefed up version. I'm all here for the super shoe wars.
Yeah,
I
I feel
love
like
it.
2025 could be the year of the super shoe, is
Yeah.
what everyone's talking about.
I'm super guilty of this. I focus on super shoes all the time, but I don't run in super shoes ever.
you
It's more like, it's the Evos and the other things that we really should be looking at. So
It is true, but we do get that trickle down. So now what we've got in the Evo SL is basically, last model's midsole, but trickling down into a training shoe,
Yeah.
which is pretty special. So I think that technology should again still trickle down from the hyper shoes into the super shoes, if that's what we're going to call them,
Yeah.
and then into the daily trainers. So
I'm
I'm
here for
hoping
it.
that everybody wins as long as they can stay cheap.
they're not staying cheap at the
enough.
moment. Yeah.
That is the other thing with this Evo SL as well, is priced at 240 Australian is actually really good value compared to what's currently out there.
But what if you're a running influencer? How can we de-influence?
Not a running influencer. De-influencing running is all about where we look at myth busting and all the trends and things you see on social media, and we kind of talk about it, debunk it, but also get a better understanding of everything that we need to know as runners.
We've got our first one, probably the one that I see the most often in the clinic, is just the Zone 2 hype. So, the question is, what is Zone 2 and why do I keep hearing about it? So Zone 2 refers to basically the second zone on an intensity model, where Zone 1 is sort of more like walking, Zone 5 is more like really high intensity, just the zones that you'd normally see on the Garmin. So obviously everyone's seen an Instagram influencer talking about, you should be running more in Zone 2, you should spend a lot of time in Zone 2. And here, I just want to talk about how that might not necessarily be for everyone.
Yeah.
So like the polarized model was basically a philosophy of training that was developed by Steven Seiler, essentially in the Norwegian cross-country skiing team, where 80% of their work was done at easy, sort of in that Zone 2, and 20% was done at higher intensities, and they had really, really good success with that. So then it became sort of well researched that elite athletes do quite well in this, and then it's sort of transferred across into everyday athletes must sort of take on this similar polarized approach. So even just a recent research paper that's just come out in the last month or so, we'll maybe link to it in the show notes. It was essentially like a meta-analysis, so like a study looking at a collection of studies talking about training intensity distribution and how that will influence people's VO2 max and endurance performance. So what they found was that elite athletes do very well with this polarized approach that's more 80-20, but maybe other people who aren't elite could do better off like a more pyramidal approach, where the bottom of the pyramid is your zone 2, and then it goes up hierarchically from there to have some what we call grey zone training, or can be called grey zone training, that's more like that zone 3, zone 4 training, and then a bit of really intense zone 4, zone 5 at
Would
the
you
top.
say it's pretty fair that most amateur runners would be constantly in that grey area all the time anyway?
Yeah, it definitely some people, especially if they're just trying to build their aerobic base initially. So what I see in the clinic is that if people get like too attached to that zone 2 heart rate, they can sort of end up experiencing what's called cardiovascular drifts, where basically across the run, like heart rate maybe was in their zone 2, and then after half an hour it's just not anymore, and they can't really stay in that zone without walking a lot. What I found it can be more helpful is if runners are just trying to sort of run to feel, where you're not really worrying too much about that heart rate intensity, because it's not like they're going to be running as much as an elite athlete anyway.
Yep.
And not worrying too much about that heart rate, trying to stay sort of at a feel, maybe it's like 3, 4, 5 out of 10 in terms of intensity. And
I've heard people say like conversational pace, like you should be able to carry on a conversation.
yeah, for sure.
Without being like...
That's it, because it does become a point where the running can become a bit slow, where they're sort of plodding along, at a pace that's not really helpful for impact, where sometimes injuries can then start to pop up just because they're sort of not using the muscles enough if the running does become so close to a plod. So I think in terms of like what a runner can do to try and build an aerobic base without maybe stressing too much about heart rate, or sort of running along so slowly that they end up like hurting their legs, is maybe trying to keep an average zone 2 heart rate in a perfect world. So, jogging and running, trying to stay in that zone, and then if they fall out of the zone, just walking for a while, not pausing the watch, just keeping it going.
My question is, obviously you say this is obviously applicable for the everyday athlete, and that's just because they wouldn't be getting the same volume of training as that athlete who is training professionally, to have that 80%, 20% rule, or that I think we all hear about on social media, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the main difference, and it's probably why it doesn't work for amateur athlete who's just trying to build that base with 2 or 3 hours a week versus like an elite athlete who's going to do 20 plus.
Then 80% of 2 hours is ridiculous.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'd say the one thing, as a heavier runner as well, the one thing I've noticed is if I am running too slow, my form is really bad.
Yeah.
And I become very laboured and like I'm not light on my feet. So it could actually be super counterproductive. I don't learn how to run. And so running is an efficiency sport as well. So the whole idea is that you get more efficient because your mechanics get better because you're spending time on feet. If 80% of my running is poor mechanics, I'm just reinforcing being inefficient.
Yeah.
So I'm never going to really improve because my heart rate's always going to be kind of stressed because I'm not moving efficiently at all.
And then there's also the factors of how accurate is your watch to your zones.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of
I've been clinically dead a lot of times on runs, like, please stop, you're hurting me. But, I felt fine. So in light of all that, what do you think is really important for beginner runners, amateur runners?
I think the takeaway advice is probably trying to run to feel, aiming for that 3 to 4 out of 10 intensity initially, and then just trying to expect that it gets a little bit harder across the run, but not trying to focus too much on the heart rate. The other thing is that there's no shame in walk jogging. So if we're jogging for a bit, yeah, exactly.
Walking. I'll come up with a name.
That's not.
Okay. Walk jogging it is.
Walk jog is fine.
Okay. Agree to disagree.
I think trying to incorporate cross-training is also the hidden secret sauce there. The last one was just to be patient. So even though like really good changes can occur to a person's fitness in a few months, realistically, to build a really strong aerobic base, it takes people years to do over time. So just got to really be patient and chip away at it because it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Oh, another running
Zing.
pun.
Here's where we're just going to try and look into themes around how trying to stay healthy, both maybe physically, mentally, and just advice where we get people in to try and stay healthy all year round.
Yep.
So,
and why are you qualified to give this advice?
So I work in a running clinic as my day job. So frequently trying to look after people with lower limb injuries, and just trying to refer people to the right professionals, if it is like a dietitian or a sports psychologist or a sports doctor, if we need different interventions.
Yep.
So just trying to be across all of the different ways that an athlete might need care and looking after to keep them sort of on their feet. So the main one that we want to go over today was just to have a chat sort of about injuries. Sometimes injuries can be a bit confusing and perplexing for people, and just trying to give a bit of basic information to set the scene for that.
Awesome. So what are the most common injuries you see coming in?
So 80% of running injuries are sort of at the knee or below the knee. So a majority of the injuries could be at the knee. We've got the patellofemoral pain, so things happening around the kneecap. The ITB is also a really common one as well. These make up sort of about 40% of running injuries at the knee or below. The shin and calf injuries are really, really common as well. They can be a bit sticky. We've got muscle strains in the calf, shin splints, issues with the tibia and sort of going on like that. The ankle and the foot take quite a lot of injuries as well, about 25% total. Some really common ones could be like plantar fascia pain, Achilles tendon problems, or bone stress injuries in the foot.
Okay.
The most common ones.
So what are the factors that contribute to getting these injuries, and I guess what are the red flags that we can look out for in preventing that?
It's a bit tricky. The main contributors to injury is load, and load can be sort of broken down differently depending on who's doing what. So across, say, like a normal runner doing a 50 kilometre week, there's almost like loads within loads. So say for that person over that 50 kilometres, they've got different runs at different paces on different terrains, sort of in different shoes, which changes load as well. Mm-hmm. And then across different phases of their training load, where they might be a bit stronger or a bit more tired in different periods, and that can sort of change the load as well. But in a nutshell, it's load causes injury, and our ability to recover from that load or not is sort of what will dictate if we sustain to an injury or not.
Yeah, and I think one of the big ones that I've learned recently and that I've been trying to work on and you've been helping me with.
Were you injured recently, were you?
No, it was a bit of an injury, but is fatigue, as you mentioned, and I think that's really challenging when you are cross training, and making sure your legs aren't cooked when you're going out on a run, because again, that is where injuries can occur, as your muscles are tired and your form isn't there. So that's one that I've been really working on. And
that's a really good example of like the load within the load and how that changes across the training block. So what might be fine when you're fresh in week 2 of a block, might be a bit different when a person's deep into a block and really tired.
So obviously we know the contributing factors now. How can I prevent injury? Thinking about our load. And
well, if you never run, technically you can't get injured from running.
Outside of not running,
okay.
The main thing would just be to try and build in things gradually. So say if it's like an increase in volume or an increase in intensity, just to build that in gradually. If it's a change in shoes, maybe not wearing that one pair of shoes every run for the next 10 runs. If a person's taking on some trails or some hills or something like that, just to gradually introduce those different types of load, just so that the body has a little bit of time to adjust to that. Bodies are great, like they can adjust to so many things, but just don't want to try and adjust to too many things at once. And then just trying to look after that recovery. So end of the day, just the sleep and nutrition and making good decisions is normally the best way to do it. And
how much would you recommend if you are wanting to up the Ks each week? What is too much?
Yeah, totally. I do think that the 10% rule works pretty well for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So say if a runner was doing 30 Ks a week, adding in 10% each week, even though it might feel slow, will sort of compound on itself, relatively quickly. That does reach a point where, say, if a runner's doing 80 kilometers a week, where jumping from 80 to 88 to almost 100 might be slightly fast. But generally speaking, for most things, I think it works pretty well and it's pretty safe. It's pretty simple, right?
But I think then also you just apply a bit of common sense, listen to your body, what it's feeling, and if you're not feeling good, don't increase it.
That's it. That feel and just body awareness is one of the best things people can develop too, where they sort of know, am I a bit cooked today? How are my muscles? Am I being honest about how much this niggle hurts?
And I think the reality is, if you do feel cooked, you're taking a risk by training. Often people weigh up, oh, I'm going to miss a run, and they put such massive weight behind the fact that you're going to miss one run.
Sure.
But then you're actually potentially signing yourself up for, the number one rule of running is kind of don't get injured, right? So,
but that's where also the beauty of cross training comes in. Going for a ride, going for a swim, you can still get those adaptations that you want and minimize some of that load. How do I know when is, I guess, a red flag and when I need to go seek help?
So I think that if something's been hanging around for a few weeks, it's not really going away. Maybe if it's not warming up when we're running and it's starting to modify like how we move. So say if a person can't run normally, like their gait's changed because they're trying to like nurse something that hurts. I think that's a good sign to go in and seek some professional advice before you maybe hurt something else. Like it's pretty common that throughout the injury cycle that something else starts hurting because of the compensation due to the original injury. So trying not to get two injuries because of one injury is probably a pretty good reason to just get things checked out.
This is essentially the gossip girl of running, it may become, but each episode we'll kind of look at the contributors to running culture at the moment, but also in history. Running clubs across Australia may be a theme, but also major milestones that we're seeing across running and looking at the history of running. And I guess to set the scene for the first episode, I kind of wanted to talk about the running boom that everyone is so aware of. Everyone's talking about it, run clubs are going wild, marathons are selling out in record times.
Lotteries to even get into marathons.
Oh my gosh, I'm trying to get Gold Coast in Melbourne. It was the most stressful thing I've ever been through.
Did you get both? Are you running? Oh,
of course. Oh. It was touch
Must
and go.
Be nice.
And I guess I wanted to kind of think about, is this the first running boom that we've ever seen? And I did a little bit of research and I've come to the conclusion it's definitely not.
Okay.
And there was a similar thing that happened in the 1970s. Obviously, the 1970s, there was a lot of development in education on health and fitness, for one thing. But there was also media coverage really evolved. There was the first time that running events were really televised to most people, and it started to become accessible through media. So as a result, there was the influence and development of key figures. So for example, Frank Shorter finished 2 minutes ahead in the Munich Olympic marathon, and people were just in awe of it. Bill Rogers was known for his 4 victories in New York and Boston marathons, and everyone was talking about it. It exploded across media. And then as a result, the popularity of road races just really exploded. And the New York City Marathon began in 1970 with just over 100 participants, and it grew rapidly, becoming a symbol of this running boom. There was also a lot of social, political upheaval and, fallout from the Vietnam War. And I think, when we think about it, people find comfort in running, people find freedom in running. I think we can all relate to that. And perhaps it was a bit of a moment of empowerment and, all freedom that people found there. And then when we look at now and what's going on, I'm not likening anything to post-war, but we are post-COVID, and there was a lot of social and political upheaval during that time.
Yep.
And, people needed to find new ways of connection, new ways of freedom and empowering themselves. And I think as a result, people found running and then really enjoyed it and stayed within it. And we're still seeing that continue. Media coverage, when we think about that, we're in a new evolution of media coverage with social media.
Look at us now.
Exactly. So, thinking about that, TV was the moment back then, but it's now social media. Everyone's documenting their running journey, and we see not just coverage on athletes, but everyday athletes, if you will, and everyone's documenting it, and it's more accessible. When we think about health and fitness, obviously athlete level insights are now available to all of us really through our watches, Whoops, things like that, whatever, Coros, Garmin, whatever it is. We've got athlete level insights which people never had before, and I think it's really empowering people to have the knowledge on how to train, but also, make it more, I guess, sustainable in their lives with focusing on recovery and things like that, so people are becoming better runners. I guess my question to you guys off of this and a bit of a discussion is, like all things, obviously things going in and out of fashion. Is running here to stay? Is it a bit of a boom? And what do you think is coming up with running, because obviously marathons are selling out like crazy. Is that going to continue? Are we going to have to fight over marathon tickets each year? Or
I thought it was a really cool and unexpected outcome of the pandemic, where running of all things explodes in popularity. Like, who could have seen that coming? But I'm so happy that it has gone in this trajectory where people are drinking alcohol at some of the lowest rates in the younger generations than I think they ever have, since they started recording these rates. So I think that's really powerful as a symbol in itself. People are turning towards exercise more. They've got the information to do it right. It's more socially acceptable as well. It's good. I think it's here to stay, especially with events like High Rocks, where it is half running almost, and that's exploded in popularity, where running's not seen as much as just that skinny person running really fast activity. That it is just a fundamental way that people move, and people are loving it. People are getting around the shoes, they're getting around the tech, they're getting around run clubs. I love it. I think it's here to stay.
I love that you mentioned High Rocks, because that was one of the things that I was also thinking about, and the way that events have evolved to become so much more inclusive. With High Rocks, obviously it's still a real challenge, but there's singles, there's solos, doubles, relay, and you have adaptive athletes as well available. The only thing that I had thought of was, with marathons, and there are smaller versions, like Gold Coast Marathon will have a half marathon and has a 10K, I believe. But I think people are realizing that it takes a lot each year to train for a marathon, and it's actually not sustainable to be doing 2-3 marathons a year. But people are loving race day vibes, and people love that race energy. I wonder if there's going to be more frequent, almost mini events, or what's to come. I would love to see more frequent mini events that people can get that race day feel without having that a huge training block, or because I think that's what people are loving.
I think one factor that we don't really think about too often is the social aspect, but more so I think there's a direct correlation between music festivals dying and running becoming more popular. It isn't easy to put on a big event. And I feel like it is very hard because culture is changing. Music festivals, people are usually on drugs. There's great music, but it's very hard to pay for these massive acts, whereas it's pretty easy to put on a marathon, and there's a social aspect to it. As the world changes and all these political things happen, running's like this siloed thing. There's no politics in running, there's no anything, and it's like the ultimate kind of equilibrium. Even if you're a cyclist, to get into cycling, you've got to have like a $6,000 bike to be serious, and then so it's like running. Obviously, there's shoes, but you could be a great runner in a pair of $100 shoes if you wanted to, and you can still get out there and participate. So I think the barrier to entry is really low. The social impact is high. More and more we're working more. We're looking for places to find people with common interests. So-sos is kind of like the dating run club. You see this shift of I don't want to be going out and clubbing, but I'm more than happy to wake up at 4:30 a.m. to go for a run with a bunch of people that are interested as well. So I definitely think it's here to stay. I don't think it's a trend. I think if anything, it's going to continue to build. Hopefully that's why we're doing this thing, right? We're passionate about it and we see longevity in it. So is that it? Episode 1.
So that's episode 1.
That's episode 1.
Done. Yeah.